Nice to meet you too.
So I'm just going to,
What's that?
yeah.
Isn't he there?
So I'm going to make a quick statement because we all obviously are disappointed that the governor did not show up, that he had every opportunity and advance notice to show up. He was given the opportunity to appear through Skype and chose not to. In an election this year where transparency and communication is so important, obviously it's disappointing. But we're going to make lemon out of lemonade because the latest polls show 40% of voters are undecided in terms of knowing Cynthia.
Woo!
So we're going to get a chance to know her, and everyone watching this stream is going to get to know her. So with that, welcome.
Thank you, Amy, so much. Thank you.
Please take the floor.
Thank you. Okay, hi, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for being here. I am Cynthia Nixon, and I am running for governor of New York State. And I am delighted to be here tonight with you all. I think it's so important for candidates to come and present themselves to voters so that voters can get to know us a little bit, get to know what our ethics are, get to know what we stand for, get to ask us questions. I am disappointed, as you are, that Andrew Cuomo has chosen not to show for this debate. Despite the fact that it is basically happening in his backyard, despite the fact that I know that a number of accommodations were offered to him to make it easier for him to show up. And I have to say that I think it says a lot about who he is and how he governs and what obligations he feels that he has to voters. But I am here and I am delighted, so thank you for being here. I am a lifelong New Yorker. I am a proud public school graduate. I am a prouder public school parent of 3 kids, Sam and Charlie and Max, 21, 15, and 7. New York is the state where I started acting when I was 12 years old in order to pay for college because my family wasn't able to afford it. It's the state where I've had my 40-long-year career, where I've raised my kids, where I've met and married the love of my life, my wife Christine, who is here tonight. Where I have fought for LGBTQ equality and women's rights and reproductive rights, and most especially where I have fought for the last 17 years for better funded public schools and particularly more equitably funded public schools across New York State. We are, 1 minute. We are at a very exciting moment in the Democratic Party. We are seeing voters not only across New York State, but across this country reject the establishment and ask more of our electeds, particularly ask more of our Democrats and those who call themselves progressives. Because what we see in this year with Donald Trump in the White House is we have to not just give voters something to vote against, we have to give them something to vote for. And what better place to do that in New York, a proudly progressive 2-to-1 Democratic state, where we have a whole host of legislative priorities that this governor has not gotten to. 10 seconds wrap up, so I will talk about those later, but just say that this year we need to elect not only more Democrats, we need to elect better Democrats, and with the proper leadership and with a movement, we can have a New York that works for all of us, a New York for the many, not just the few. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm delighted to have all this time with you, and I'm sure our audience is as well, because we're going to get through a lot of issues. We're going to get to hear your opinions and your thoughts, and that's very exciting for all of us and a great opportunity. I'm going to start off with a personal question, because I tweeted when you first decided to run that I was very excited to see someone challenge Governor Cuomo. And I want to ask you how you respond to people who say that you're an actress and not a politician. Let's just get the elephant out of the room now. How would you respond to that on the qualification kind of question?
So I would say that I don't think that celebrity is inherently something bad in politics. It gives you a platform. It depends on what you do with that celebrity. And as I said a moment ago, it's something that I have used for decades now to fight for a host of progressive issues, including LGBTQ equality and women's rights, and better funded and more equally funded public schools. I think particularly at this moment in our history and this moment in New York State, when we see so much corruption and dysfunction in Albany, it is really important to have people running for office who are not part of the system, who are not taking corporate donations, as I am not accepting a single dime of corporate donations in this campaign. So I'm not beholden to industries like the real estate industry, like the corporate developers, like the fossil fuel industry, so that you know that when I am elected to office, I will be able to not give those powerful, wealthy, potential donors the lion's share of everything and distribute to the vast majority of people in New York the crumbs that are left. I think we're at a moment in our history when voters, frankly, particularly progressive voters, but perhaps the voters on the other side too, are so far ahead of our electeds in terms of the change that they want, that it's why thousands of people across this country are running for office for the first time. Many of them are women, and I feel, as they do, that we looked who was in charge, and we decided, after years of trying, pushing from the outside, we decided that if we wanted real change, we were the ones that were going to have to step up and bring it on.
Thank you. I just want to also add, as a woman who runs a women's rights group, that Arnold Schwarzenegger, Al Franken, too, one that we love, one that we don't love so much.
Ronald
we're
Reagan.
Also former actors. Okay, so the first question is on tax, budget, SALT, deduction, loss. Okay, a lot of topics. Many local municipalities are struggling with their budgets under the 2% tax cap. Yet Westchester families also pay some of the highest taxes in the nation. How do you propose to help struggling municipalities without increasing the already burdensome tax bills Westchester residents pay?
So I think that basically what we've seen for the last 8 years is that Governor Cuomo's response to budgeting is to have the state pay a smaller and smaller share of things that are both state and locally funded. And of course, one of the issues that I'm most passionate about is better funding for education, because our low-income, high-need school districts are so underfunded, but that we need a floor below which we don't go in any school district, but we also need more uniformity, and the way to get that is to stop tying education budgets to property taxes. But yes, absolutely. And to have the state take on a bigger share of that. And that there are a number of proposals that I have, including single-payer health care, because frankly, one of the really most onerous parts of local budgets, and that is a burden on property owners, is the Medicaid portion that is locally funded. And when we make a transition to a Medicare for all single payer system, not only will we insure all our people, we'll insure them better, we'll insure them cheaper with no copays, with no deductibles. It will be a tremendous savings to individuals, to businesses, to the state, and it will bring real relief to property owners.
So let's stick with education, which you obviously have great experience with. The question is, what do you see as the future of Common Core in New York State, and how does the standardized testing play into those plans?
So I think that one of the most wrong-headed things that we are doing right now in our education system is the over-testing of our students. It's very wrong-headed, and I think Andrew Cuomo's desire to link teacher evaluations to student test scores was a grievous mistake. I think we need to uncouple them, absolutely, and I think we need to return respect, but also a certain degree of autonomy to the teaching profession. We need it to be a profession that people want to go into, and we need our teachers to not be just doing English and math test prep all day long. which is the situation that we have now. We need to really have rich curricula of science and social studies and art and music, and I think that this is the kind of this kind of testing is not only pressuring our kids. I think it's destroying any kind of a joy in education, and frankly, all it's doing is making kids good at taking tests, but it's not in any way preparing them for real life.
Reproductive rights, hot topic. Do you oppose any and all efforts to restrict a woman's right to choose, including the targeted regulation of abortion providers, TRAP laws? Massachusetts recently repealed its state abortion law to protect choice should Roe v. Wade be repealed. Do you see a similar path to passing legislation to protect a woman's right to choose in New York State?
So let me say that my mother, before I was born, had an abortion when it was illegal in New York State, and it was something that she found very painful to talk about. So I don't know exactly what her experience is, but I know it was awful, and I know it was very important to her that she convey this to me as a way of helping me understand how important and how we must protect our reproductive rights. I think this is a case in New York State where Andrew Cuomo has paid a lot of lip service to being a champion of choice, but through his empowerment of the Independent Democratic Conference and the Republicans in the state Senate, he has shown that that is his priority instead of codifying Roe versus Wade into law here. And so this has been a problem ever since he took office, but he has never made it a priority. And now with Roe versus Wade hanging in the balance, New York women are very vulnerable. This used to be a state where women from across the country would travel to access safe legal abortions, and now women in New York who are in need of later term abortions are actually going outside of the state because it is hard to find a doctor who will perform them here because it still exists in the criminal code and doctors are afraid of criminal prosecution. It's very important that we pass the Reproductive Health Act, and it's very important that we pass the Comprehensive Contraceptive Care Act. And again, Andrew Cuomo gives a lot of lip service to this, but if he really had made either of these things a priority, they would be passed already and New York's women would be protected.
Next topic is immigration. Should New York State suspend and/or restrict any state or local prison contracts with ICE to detain immigrants? Open to expansion of the question.
So yes, I do not think that New York State should be either in the business of private prisons nor in the business of private detention facilities. This is a scourge. This is a scourge on the United States, and it's a scourge on New York State. I also think we should divest our pension funds from funds that invest in private prisons, from major banks that invest in private prisons and are profiting off people's misery. And I also think there is so much more that we could be doing here in New York State to protect our immigrant population, and particularly our undocumented people. I think we need to pass the Liberty Act to stop our local law enforcement from cooperating with ICE. Again, something that we would have done without the IDC and the Republican control of the Democratic majority Senate. But most importantly, we need to expand access to driver's licenses for all our undocumented people. This is something that a governor of New York State can do in a single day by executive order. And why hasn't Governor Cuomo done it? It is something I will do in office on my first day as governor of New York State. Because it's one thing to proclaim we are a sanctuary state, and it's another to still be letting ICE use our fingerprint bases, letting ICE use our driver's license information for our documented immigrants. But if we really care about protecting our undocumented people, if we really care about staunching the flow of deportations, tearing New York families apart, turning New York into a police state, this is the easiest, quickest, most effective thing we can do to stop the racial profiling of our undocumented people and stop the deportations.
Thank you. Next topic is money in politics. How do you propose we reduce the influence of money in our elections and government in order to increase transparency of government and its responsibilities to its citizens? Will you pledge to be a leader in getting money out of politics?
I will pledge to be a leader in getting money out of politics. It is the number one reform we need to do here in New York State. It is the reform that gives birth to all the other reforms. It is why I'm not accepting any corporate donations in my campaign. We need to close the LLC loophole here, which allows corporations to donate a literally unlimited amount of money to political campaigns. This was an issue, again, that Governor Cuomo campaigned on in 2010, but since taking office, he has accepted $16 million through the LLC loophole, which is more than every single legislator in Albany combined. It is very hard to do the right thing when you're getting millions and millions of dollars to do wrong. I think we also greatly need to reduce the amount of money an individual can donate to a primary, $21,000, or a general, $40,000. And most especially, we need to enact campaign matching funds. This is really the way, both by limiting the influence of big money and amplifying the influence of small donor donations by matching funds, as we have in New York City, a 6-to-1 matching fund. This is a way to help elect people to office who are not in the pocket of big money. I'm very proud of the fact, for example, that I received more small donor donations in the first day of my campaign than Andrew Cuomo has received in 7 years. Oh, 30 more seconds? Absolutely. So he has $36 million that he has raised to fight this campaign, and if I will tell you exactly how much of that money has come into him in small donor donations, less than 0.1%. So what that means is if you are an everyday New Yorker, the chances of getting your agenda seen to are exactly that, 0.1%.
Okay, the next question is on IDC, which you've mentioned a couple times, just so everyone in the room knows what IDC is. I think we're all pretty activated on it, but just in case. Here's the question from Sally from Larchmont. Many New Yorkers were unaware of the existence of the IDC, the Independent Democratic Conference, until the 2016 election. At that point, awareness spiked, leaving many Democrats very unhappy with that group. How would you, as governor and therefore leader of the New York State Democratic Party, ensure that there is not a reincarnation of the IDC or any other similar political arrangement that enables Republican control of the state Senate ever again? And just very quickly, what happened is there are 8 state senators who ran as Democrats, but they've caucused with the Republicans, giving the Republicans effective control of the state Senate. So.
Yes, and Andrew Cuomo also allowed the Republicans to gerrymander their own districts, so that was a real win for the Republicans as well, thanks to Andrew Cuomo. So I want to say that the IDC is really, that Governor Cuomo had a big hand not only in creating them, but in upholding them. And for 7.5 years, he has claimed he had nothing to do with it. He used to say, I can perform marriages, but I can't make them happen. But after we entered my campaign launch, literally 2 weeks later, he held a press conference with Jeff Klein and Andrea Stewart Cousins and announced that the IDC had been reconciled. So we are supposedly, those 8 members have come back into the fold. We're still 1 vote away because of Simcha Felder, who is also a Democrat who caucuses with the Republicans, but not technically a member of the IDC. And I just want to be clear, we would never be in this situation if it weren't for Andrew Cuomo's empowerment. We have literally had a majority of Democrats in the New York State Senate for more than 5 years. And so we're well on our way. We're 1 vote away. And I just want to say I'm not the only person up for election this fall. I don't know that we can get Simcha Felder out of office, but I do think that there are a number of of Republican state senators who are vulnerable. And once Andrea Stewart Cousins is the undisputed leader, not just of the Democrats in the state Senate, but the state Senate itself, it will be transformative. And all those progressive legislative priorities that have been dead on arrival for the last 7 years will finally be brought up for a vote, and many of them will be passed.
And just a fun fact, the IDC candidates have said in the past that they would be Democrat before elections and then switch back. So we all need to get to the polls September 13th. Another reason.
Yes, because they all have challengers. They all have challengers.
Yes. Okay, the next topic is LGBTQ issues. The current administration in Washington is openly hostile to LGBTQ Americans. What can New York do to protect this population against the Trump administration? Please answer with specifics. And this is from Kristen from Chappaqua.
So, again, because of the IDC, we have not passed basic LGBT and particularly trans-positive legislation like GENDA. GENDA is the Gender Expression Non-Discrimination Act, which would have provided really important protections for trans people when you're talking about housing, when you're talking about jobs, when you're talking about violence. I have 3 kids. My oldest kid is trans, so this issue is particularly important to me at a time when our LGBT community, but particularly our trans community, and particularly trans people of color, are so under attack by Donald Trump and the federal government. It is important that we enact every protection we can here for people. It's really important, I think, again, that we fight for our LGBT community and that we outlaw conversion therapy here, something we should have done a long time ago. And we really need to do a better job with homelessness across the board, but when you're talking about LGBT people and vulnerable people, so many of our homeless youth are LGBT kids who have been thrown out by their families, not only in New York State, but really more across the country, and they have migrated here to New York for protection, but so many of them are living on the streets, so many of them are barely surviving, so many of them are engaging in sex work as a way of surviving. This is a crisis here that rivals the AIDS crisis in something that calls out to the LGBT community as something that we must, these are literally our children, and we must do a better job of intervening and protecting them and saving them.
The next topic is police conduct. Eric Garner and Zahid Vassell were both killed by police officers in New York. 2 officers are currently on trial for rape of a suspect in their custody in New York. What are you going to do to regulate police presence and conduct in environments ranging from schools to street patrols, as well as restore trust between police and some of the neighborhoods and communities in which they serve? And that question is from Dylan from Croton-on-Hudson.
There is so much to say. It is hard to answer that question in 2 minutes, but I will try. The Black Lives Matter movement has been so important in putting these issues front and center, and now it is time for our elected leaders to take that knowledge and really make it public policy. We need to hold police accountable, and we need police to be much more transparent. I am supportive of the repeal of Statute 50A, which would, by repealing it, it would mean that we could release officers' names after a shooting, after a killing, which I think is so important, and I think it must be done within 48 hours. We put an enormous amount of trust in our police, but we allow them to carry weapons and discharge them at will, and we must hold them to a high standard. We must also, I'm supportive of the Police Stat Act, which means that we would keep, the police would keep statistics on who is being stopped, who is being arrested, who is dying in police custody, that we'd keep biographical information of ethnicity, race, gender, and age. And we need to do much more, so many people of color in this state are being stopped by police for minor infractions and being arrested and being entrapped in the criminal justice system. We need to take these minor offenses that, frankly, if somebody who looked like me was doing them, the police would not even notice. We need to take minor offenses and we need to stop making them arrestable offenses. We need to make them ticketable offenses. We need to do a better job of paroling people, particularly as our prison population is aging, and we have to make sure a full third of incarcerations in New York come from people who have violated parole, not because they've committed a crime, but they've committed a technical infraction like missing a meeting. Again, we need to get people off of parole more quickly, and we need to make sure that if you slip up in such a minor way, the result is not your reincarceration.
Another hot topic, voting reform. New York consistently has one of the worst voter turnout rates in the entire nation. In 2014, we ranked 48th in the nation, with only 34% of voters turning out. In order to increase participation, do you support automatic voter registration, early voting, pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds, better flexibility to change parties, consolidating state and federal primary dates? And how would you fund these initiatives?
I support all of those things. We must have early voting, particularly for working people. It is very hard to get to the polls on a weekday. It is really important that we have a couple of weeks of early voting, including 2 weekends. It's really important that we have automatic registration. I think it's really important that we have same-day registration for first-time voters so that they can show up at the polls and register and vote on the same day. We are literally the only state that has neither open primaries nor an ability to switch your party relatively soon before the election. My own wife is a Working Families Party member. She will not be able to vote for me in the Democratic Party because she would have had to change her registration almost a year before the election. Yes, this will take an influx of cash, but when you consider how central voting is to the functioning of our democracy, it is a small price to pay in the same way that campaign matching funds are a small price to pay for our system being more truly democratic. We really, we don't have angry sheriffs with shotguns deterring people from voting, but what we have here, make no mistake, is soft voter suppression by an establishment and incumbents that really really are not incentivized for people to show up, particularly new voters, particularly young voters, working class voters, voters of color. We need to change that in New York State.
Next topic is food insecurity. 1 in 5 children live in food insecure households. What specific plans do you have to increase the number of children in New York State who have access to adequate nutrition?
I have to say, this is something I have not given enough thought to. I think that what we see really with the cuts of the last 8 years, we've seen a system that really prioritizes cutting corporate taxes, cutting taxes on the wealthiest, cutting taxes on banks, and we've really seen a divestment in a whole series of human services and particularly supports for our most vulnerable. This is exactly the kind of thing that we need to be prioritizing, that we need to be prioritizing our most vulnerable, and we need to be investing in our communities. So it certainly is in line with everything that I think is important, but I don't have a specific proposal for it.
Okay, so that leads into the next question, which is overall policy goals and strategy. If you are elected, what would be your top 3 legislative priorities?
So all of my priorities, I would say, revolve around addressing inequality, economic inequality, racial inequality, gender inequality. I think, of course, I've spoken a lot about education. It's a really important part of my platform, and I think if you take education here and criminal justice here, they exist along a continuum, because what we have now is a lopsided system that invests far too little in education and far too much in criminal justice, and we need to fund schools, not jails. So that would be a major priority, but also an overarching theme of my administration will be an investment in New York, an investment in our infrastructure. What we're seeing is a New York that is not designed to work for all of us, a New York that is really designed for only the wealthiest, and it's making New York, frankly, a less and less good place to live for anybody but the most wealthy. We need to invest in transportation, not just the MTA, not just Metro North, but really, as gentrification is pushing people farther and farther out from the centers of town, we need better bus service. We need better public transportation for people to get around who do not have a car. So I would say, addressing the school to prison pipeline, investing in our infrastructure, both our hard infrastructure and our human services infrastructure, and leading on the environment as a tremendous job creator.
Okay, so we have time for one final question, and then you'll get an opportunity for a closing statement. So the final question is, if you win the primary, how would you unify and motivate the state Democratic Party?
When I win the primary, it will send a shockwave and a thrill of excitement through the New York State Democratic Party, I must tell you, that have been waiting so long to see a progressive era again in New York. Look what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's victory did here last month. This is the kind of Democratic Party that we are hungry to see here in New York. This is the kind of insurgent campaign, people-powered campaign. When I win, there will be people who have been so hungry for all this legislation that we haven't enacted, particularly with Donald Trump in the White House. The time is now to enact it. And for people who were perhaps hanging back, they will come to understand that there is a new day in Albany, and you better get on board or you better get out of the way, because the blue wave is here.
Thank you. So the floor is yours. You have 2 to 3 minutes to address everyone before we call it a night, and whatever you would like us all to know about you that we haven't covered yet. We've covered a lot of ground, but any questions that we haven't covered that you want people to know about, the floor is yours.
Right. Well, thank you. I didn't know I was going to make a closing statement. I'll just say thank you so much for being here. I think it's a really exciting time. It's a really terrible moment in our country's history, but in a place like New York, it's providing us with a tremendous opportunity. It's providing us with a tremendous opportunity not only to fight back against the Trump agenda, but to be a laboratory for ourselves and for the nation about where this country can go and where this country needs to go. There are so many things that we need to fight for here in New York. We need to hold corporate polluters accountable when they poison our communities. And we need to use the revenue for that to turbocharge 100% just transition to renewable energy. We need to legalize marijuana in New York State, because first and foremost, it's a racial justice issue. And when we do that, we need to prioritize the individuals and the communities that have been most harmed by the war on drugs and make sure they are prioritized for licenses and small business loans and other supports, so that it's not just wealthy white capitalists like John Boehner who are getting rich off this multi-billion-dollar industry. We need to end cash bail in New York State. We need to expand access to driver's licenses to all our undocumented people. Our rent laws are expiring next year. We need to not only renew them, we need to close the loopholes, we need to strengthen them, and frankly, we need to expand them across New York State because we have an affordability crisis. As we discussed, we need to do campaign finance reform, we need to do voting reform, we need to pass GENDA, we need to pass the Reproductive Health Act, and we need to pass the New York DREAM Act. We need to give dreamers a shot at higher education. There's so much that we need to do in New York because New York has, we have such natural resources, we have such natural beauty, we have such a diverse and accomplished and compelling population, but right now, and New York is so often number one in so many things that we are proud of. But right now, New York is number one in inequality. And if we do not address that and address it soon, that is something that is going to swallow our state and our democracy whole. Thank you so much.
I want to thank Cynthia for being with us tonight and for showing up. We wish her luck on September 13th. And I want to thank you all, the public, for offering your questions and for showing up. And don't forget, everyone, pull out their phones before you leave. September 13th.
September 13th is
and
a
November
Thursday.
6th. And we can actually control not only the governorship, but the state senate and actually accomplish some things. So we all have to get out and vote. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.